The silence in our apartment used to be my favorite sound. It was a warm, woven thing, a tapestry created from 4 years of shared breaths, the soft turn of a page from Julian's armchair, the quiet hum of the refrigerator standing sentinel in our kitchen. It was the sound of safety, of a love so sure of itself it didn't need to make a noise. I would watch him from the sofa, a mug of tea warming my hands, his brow furrowed in concentration over some dense book about ancient civilizations, and a wave of contentment would wash over me. By every conceivable metric, our life was perfect. I had a good man, a great man. Julian was my anchor in a world that often felt like a raging sea. He was kind, preternaturally patient, and endlessly supportive of my ambitions. He knew the topography of my heart, its hidden valleys and sunlit peaks, in a way no one else ever had. And yet, a seed of disquiet had been planted within me, and it was beginning to sprout ugly, tangled vines of dissatisfaction. It was an insidious weed, wrapping itself around the very foundations of my happiness. The source of it was the quality I once bragged about to my friends, Julian's unshakable, almost spiritual calm. He was a placid lake, serene and deep, and I, it seemed, could not make a single ripple on his surface. In our first years together, I had interpreted his lack of jealousy as the ultimate compliment, a testament to his absolute trust in me. Our friends saw it too. "You're so lucky, Alara," my friend Chloe would say over brunch. "Most guys are so insecure. Julian just trusts you. It's the foundation." And I believed it. Our love was a fortress, its foundation built of mutual respect and unshakable faith. But time has a way of weathering even the strongest beliefs. His calm no longer felt like a foundation, it felt like a void. His trust no longer felt like a gift, it felt like a lack of investment. It felt, to my increasingly paranoid mind, like indifference. I remember the night it crystallized for me. I'd come home from work, practically vibrating with energy. I'd landed the Kensing account, a client my firm had been chasing for over a year. I had led the final presentation, and I had nailed it. I burst through the door, my briefcase clattering to the floor, ready to pop champagne, to be spun around the room, to share in a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. Julian looked up from his laptop, where he was meticulously organizing our digital photo albums. A gentle, proud smile touched his lips. "That's fantastic, Alara. I knew you could do it," he said, his voice as even and measured as a metronome. He stood up, gave me a warm, solid hug, and then said, "Don't forget to set your alarm. You have that early follow-up meeting." The praise was there, sincere and heartfelt. But the passion, the shared, chaotic joy I craved, was absent. My victory, so vibrant and explosive just moments before, simply deflated, fizzling out into the quiet, orderly atmosphere of our home. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of loneliness. I started collecting evidence for the case I was building against him in my head. I'd tried to test him before, in small, subtle ways. At a party, I once recounted a story of how a man at a bar had been incredibly forward, refusing to take no for an answer until the bartender intervened. I watched Julian's face for a flicker of anger, a tightening of the jaw, a protective instinct. All I got was a thoughtful frown. "That must have been uncomfortable for you," he said. "I'm glad the bartender was there." Then he changed the subject. It should have felt good that he trusted me to handle myself, that his primary concern was my comfort. Instead, it felt like a clinical diagnosis, devoid of the primal, territorial anger I read about in books and saw in movies. It felt as though it wouldn't truly matter to him if another man desired me, because the thought of losing me wasn't a tangible, terrifying threat that lit a fire in his veins. The disquiet grew until it was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my days. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Over a quiet dinner of salmon and asparagus, I pushed my food around my plate, my appetite lost to the turmoil inside me. "Julian," I started, my voice smaller than I intended. "Can I ask you something?" He immediately put down his fork, giving me his full, undivided attention. It was one of his most unnerving and wonderful qualities. When he looked at you, it felt as though the rest of the world ceased to exist. "Of course, anything. Do you ever worry?" I asked, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Worry about what?" "About us." "About me?" I elaborated, gaining a little momentum. When I'm out with my friends or at a work event, don't you ever feel a little protective, a little jealous? Don't you want to show the world that I'm yours? He listened patiently, his head tilted slightly, his clear gray eyes searching mine. He didn't dismiss me. He never did. When I finished, a long moment passed as he considered my words. I understand what you're asking for, he said finally, his voice soft. He reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was warm and steady, a familiar comfort. But that's not how I love, Ilara. I've always believed that if you want to be with me, you will. Being possessive, being jealous, that doesn't build love. It builds a cage. It's born from a fear of losing someone, and I refuse to let fear be the driving force in our relationship. If I have to cage you to keep you, then I've already lost you. He squeezed my hand. My love for you isn't in loud displays or fits of anger. It's in the coffee I make for you every morning, exactly how you like it. It's in the way I listen when you vent about your day. It's in the quiet, absolute faith I have in us. I don't need to prove that with a fight. His logic was a beautiful, impenetrable fortress. His words were a testament to a mature, healthy love that I knew, on an intellectual level, was a rare and precious thing. I felt silly, childish for wanting something so messy and dramatic, so cliché. I nodded, squeezed his hand back, and told him I understood. And a part of me did. But as we cleared the dishes together in our comfortable silence, the disquiet hummed louder than ever. His beautiful, rational explanation hadn't soothed the irrational ache in my heart. It had only defined it more clearly. He was content with the quiet, and I was starving for noise. And in that moment, watching his calm, beloved profile as he carefully stacked the plates, a terrible, seductive idea began to take shape. If he wouldn't show me his fire, then I would have to be the one to light the match. I would have to force his hand. I called it a game in my head, a harmless experiment. A little psychological study with a sample size of one, my husband. The hypothesis was simple. If subjected to the right stimuli, Julian would exhibit a possessive, jealous response, thereby proving the depths of his passion. It was a lie, I repeated to myself until I almost believed it, a justification that painted my manipulative intentions in the soft, acceptable hues of curiosity. I was in control. It was just a game. My first move was at a friend's summer barbecue. The air was thick with the scent of grilled meat and freshly cut grass. Laughter and music swirled around us. Julian was, as was his custom, engaged in a thoughtful, low-key debate about a new political book with a small group of friends. He was in his element, intellectual and composed. I saw my opening. I drifted over to a different, more boisterous circle where Ben, one of Julian's handsome, charismatic friends from college, was telling an animated story. I positioned myself strategically, standing close enough for our shoulders to brush. I laughed at his punchlines, my laughter a little brighter, a little louder than usual. During a particularly funny anecdote, I rested my hand on his forearm, letting it linger for a beat too long. It was a classic, almost cliché gesture of flirtation, and I felt a jolt of nervous energy. I was hyper-aware of Julian, tracking his location from the corner of my eye. I saw his gaze flicker towards us. His brows drew together for a split second in a faint line of confusion. Aha, I thought, a vicious, shameful thrill running through me. He sees. It's working. This was it. The first crack in the dam. But then, as quickly as it came, the expression vanished. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if dismissing a fly, and turned his full attention back to his conversation. My heart sank. The thrill curdled into a familiar, bitter rage. He had seen it, processed it, and dismissed it as unimportant, as an anomaly not worth investigating. He had dismissed me. The message was clear. My actions weren't significant enough to warrant a reaction. My efforts required a new stage, a different co-star. My boss, Marcus, was perfectly cast for the role. Marcus was the antithesis of Julian in every conceivable way. Where Julian was quiet and steady, Marcus was slick and performative. Where Julian's compliments were rare and heartfelt, Marcus's were a constant, flattering downpour. He was a handsome man in his late 30s, with a predator's easy smile and an expert's grasp of office politics. He saw my ambition and mirrored it back at me, amplified. He began to single me out. He'd lean against my desk, his proximity just slightly invasive, his expensive cologne a subtle invasion of my space. "Alara, that presentation was a masterpiece," he'd murmur, his voice low enough so only I could hear. "Julian is a lucky man. If he ever stops reminding you of that, you know where to find me." Before my experiment, I would have deflected these comments with cool professionalism, creating a clear boundary. Now, I saw them as ammunition. I leaned in. I let our conversations after meetings linger. I allowed the topics to stray from profit margins to weekend plans. His overt admiration was a drug, and I was a desperate addict, craving the rush of feeling seen, desired, and important. His attention was a soothing balm on the wound of Julian's perceived indifference. It felt good to be appreciated, even if the appreciation felt slightly transactional. One Friday, I decided to bring the game home, to see if I could use Marcus as a tool to pry a reaction from Julian. We were making dinner together, the easy domesticity of the scene a stark contrast to the toxic game I was playing. "Marcus is so funny," I said, affecting a casual, breezy tone as I stirred a pot of risotto. "He told me today I was too exciting for quiet weekends at home." I didn't look at him, pretending to be absorbed in my task, but every nerve ending was attuned to him, waiting for his response. I was waiting for a flicker of annoyance, a probing question, a shadow of suspicion. He looked up from the salad he was tossing and smiled that gentle, infuriating smile of his. "He's not wrong. You are exciting," he said, his voice as placid as ever. He picked up a slice of cucumber and popped it into his mouth. "Do you think this needs more salt?" The whiplash was nauseating. The disappointment was a physical thing, a heavy weight settling in my stomach. In one world, at the office, I was a force of nature, a woman too exciting for a quiet life. In this one, my home, I was the woman who monitored the risotto and was consulted on salad seasonings. It was in that moment, stirring the creamy rice in a pot on my stove, that I knew. Harmless ripples were never going to be enough. I needed to become a tidal wave. I needed to create a storm so big he couldn't possibly ignore it. I became a different woman, or, perhaps, a more theatrical version of myself. I was the star of a one-woman show, and the only audience member I cared about was my husband. My wardrobe, once a collection of stylish but professional pieces, underwent a transformation. Skirts became shorter, necklines lower. I bought a pair of red heels that made a sharp, confident click on our hardwood floors, an announcement of my presence. My girls' nights became a regular fixture, carefully orchestrated evenings that stretched into the early hours of the morning. My social media became my most potent weapon. I curated my life with the precision of a propagandist. A photo of me, laughing with a glass of champagne in my hand, at a sleek downtown bar. Caption: "You never know where the night will take you." A group shot where I was standing just a little too close to a male friend, my head tilted towards his. Caption: "Great company." I was sending smoke signals, designed to look like party photos to the world, but intended as alarms for Julian. He noticed. Of course, he noticed. The comfortable silence in our home grew heavy, strained. It was no longer the silence of intimacy, but the silence of a truce on the verge of breaking. We began to orbit each other, careful not to collide. The easy flow of our conversations about our days, our dreams, our silly observations, dried up. It was replaced by a sterile, functional dialogue. "Did you pick up the dry cleaning? We're out of milk. I'll be working late tonight." The confrontation, when it finally came, was not the fiery explosion I had been trying to ignite. It was a cold, quiet implosion. It happened on a Tuesday night. I walked in just after 11, flushed from 2 glasses of wine at a work happy hour I had extended with a few colleagues. The apartment was dark, except for a single lamp casting long, accusatory shadows across the living room. Julian was sitting on the sofa, waiting. The television was off. The stillness was absolute and terrifying. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was quiet, but it had a new edge to it, a core of steel I had never heard before. It sent a shiver down my spine that was equal parts fear and a sick, twisted excitement. Finally, I dropped my purse on a chair, my defenses instantly snapping into place. "About what?" I asked, my tone feigning innocence. "About this," he said, and his simple gesture seemed to encompass everything: the red heels, the late nights, The carefully staged photos, the chasm that had opened between us, the way you've been acting, the person you're pretending to be. This isn't you, Alara. And frankly, it's disrespectful to me, and it's disrespectful to our marriage. To be called disrespectful by the calmest, most patient man I knew was more enraging than if he had screamed at me. His quiet disappointment felt like a judgment, and I couldn't bear it. Disrespectful? I scoffed, my voice rising, sharp and brittle. You want to talk about disrespectful? What about your complete and utter indifference? I feel like I am screaming for your attention, and you can't even be bothered to look up from your book. I could walk out that door and never come back, and I honestly believe you would just calmly finish your chapter. That isn't true. And you know it, he said, his gaze unwavering, his calmness a stark contrast to my rising hysteria. I trust you. Or at least, I did. What you're doing isn't about celebrating your freedom or having fun. You are trying to provoke me. You're trying to force me to become a jealous, angry man, and I am not that person. Why are you so determined to change me into someone you claim you wouldn't even want? His words were a scalpel, cutting through all my justifications and exposing the raw, ugly truth of my motivations. He saw right through me, and the exposure was terrifying. Instead of backing down, instead of feeling the shame that I should have, I lashed out, cornered and furious. Yes, I cried, the sound tearing from my chest, raw and desperate. I want to feel like I matter. I want to feel like you would fight for me. I am so sick and tired of feeling like a comfortable habit, a piece of well-loved furniture in your life. I want you to get angry. I want to see you jealous. I want you to look at me and feel a flicker of fear that you might lose me. I want you to show me that you still give a damn. The silence that followed my outburst was absolute, broken only by my ragged breathing. My desperate confession hung in the air between us, ugly and exposed. Julian's face was a mask of profound sadness. He looked at me not as his wife, but as a stranger who had inexplicably taken her place. If my quiet, steady love isn't enough for you, Alara, he whispered, his voice thick with a sorrow that pierced my anger, then no amount of manufactured drama or anger will ever be. All you're doing is breaking the one thing I thought was unbreakable. He stood up then, not in anger, but with a bone-deep weariness. He walked into our bedroom and closed the door softly behind him. The soft click of the latch was louder than any shout, more final than any slammed door. He had drawn his line in the sand. He had given me his final warning. He had shown me the cliff's edge. And I, in my blind, foolish, and arrogant pride, decided to take another step forward, convinced that the ground beneath me would hold. The air in our apartment for the next week was thin and cold, like the atmosphere on a distant planet. We moved through the shared space with the careful, practiced choreography of strangers, our movements timed to avoid contact. I'd wake up after he'd already left for his morning run. He'd stay late at the university library, grading papers, and come home after I'd retreated to the bedroom, feigning sleep. Communication was reduced to text messages about logistics. Can you pick up milk? And sticky notes left on the counter. The silence was no longer a weight. It was a physical presence, a third entity living in our home, consuming all the oxygen. A prickle of fear, real and sharp, finally began to penetrate my stubborn pride. This wasn't the passionate fight I had envisioned. This was a cold war, a slow, silent drifting apart, and I was terrified that I had lost control of the game entirely. Then, he made a move that surprised me. A move that felt like a fragile truce offering. He found me in the kitchen one evening as I was staring blankly into the refrigerator, trying to summon the energy to make dinner. Alara, he said, his voice quiet and laced with a weariness that seemed to have settled deep in his bones. Let's go out to dinner on Friday, just us. To that little Italian place on Milner Street. The one with the checkered tablecloths that you love. It was an olive branch. A final, desperate attempt to find a path back to each other across the scorched no man's land I had created. He was trying. After everything, he was still trying. The part of me that still loved him, the part that was exhausted by the constant performance and the corrosive anger, screamed at me to say yes. To drop the act, to apologize, to take his hand and let him lead us back to solid ground. The word was on the tip of my tongue. Yes. But just as I was about to open my mouth, my phone, lying on the counter, buzzed to life. A text from Marcus. Big project finally wrapped. We need to celebrate. Dinner on me? Friday night? Just you and me. You've earned it. The two invitations hung in the air, shimmering before me like a cruel mirage, two divergent paths. One was the path of difficult repair, of swallowing my pride, admitting my monstrous faults, and facing the damage I had caused. The other was the easy path, the one paved with flattering attention, expensive wine, and the intoxicating, addictive feeling of being wanted. In a moment of spectacular, life-altering cowardice and selfishness, I chose the escape. I can't. Friday, I told Julian, my eyes fixed on a spot on the kitchen floor. I couldn't bear to see the hope in his face extinguish. There's a work dinner, a big celebration for the team. I have to go. The lie felt ugly and alive in my mouth, a venomous thing. I saw his shoulders slump slightly in my peripheral vision. Oh. Okay, he said, the disappointment a palpable thing in the air. Well, maybe you and I can join them? I'd love to celebrate with you. It was one last try, a final flicker of hope. No, it's not necessary, I said quickly, waving a dismissive hand, as if his presence would be an inconvenience. It's just a casual work thing. Honestly, you'd be bored. He didn't fight me. He didn't question me. He just nodded, a quiet resignation settling over him like a shroud. Have a good time, then, he said, and walked out of the kitchen. His acceptance was the final, twisted insult in my warped reality. He doesn't even care enough to argue, the ugly voice in my head whispered. He doesn't want to be with you anyway. Friday night, I spent an extra hour getting ready. I chose a slinky black dress that I knew Julian would have found too daring, a silent act of defiance against a man who wasn't even fighting me. The dinner with Marcus was a blur of everything my ego craved. He was charming and attentive, refilling my wine glass before it was empty, touching my hand as he laughed, and lavishing me with praise that felt both exhilarating and hollow. You're a star, Alara, he said, his eyes intense over the rim of his glass. Any man who doesn't see that every single day is a fool? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, hitting the center of my insecurities. I drank it all in, letting it numb the guilt that was a low thrum beneath the surface. When he offered to drive me home, I accepted. The car ride was filled with a charged silence. When he pulled up to my building, he turned to me, his intentions clear in his gaze. You don't have to go in just yet, he murmured. For a split second, I hesitated. This was the true precipice. But I had already made my choice when I lied to my husband. I should go, I said, my voice lacking conviction. I got out of the car without looking back, feeling his eyes on me. I walked into our dark apartment to find Julian on the couch, the bluish glow of the television flickering across his face. He was watching an old black and white film, one of his favorites. He looked up as I came in, a small, tired smile on his face. Hey, how was dinner? The guilt, which had been a low hum, suddenly became a deafening roar. The cheap thrill of Marcus's attention evaporated, leaving behind a sick, hollow feeling. I could barely meet his eyes. It was fine. Just work, I mumbled, my voice tight, and fled to the bedroom, the lie a toxic weight in my stomach. A few days later, I made my fatal mistake. We were having one of our silent breakfasts when Julian asked a simple, logistical question about my expense report for the dinner. Trying to explain the bill, I said offhandedly. It was so awkward. Marcus was the only manager who showed up in the end, so the bill was just for the two of us. I froze, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. I looked up and saw his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the jealousy I had so perversely and desperately craved. It was a look of quiet, absolute devastation. It was the look of a man watching something beautiful and priceless slip through his fingers and shatter on the floor, knowing, with utter certainty, that it could never be put back together again. After that, Julian was gone. His body was still there, a warm and familiar presence in our bed, but the man I married, the soul of our home, had vacated the premises. He moved through our life like a polite ghost, a considerate phantom who passed the salt at dinner and remembered to take out the recycling. The warmth and love that had defined him, that had been the bedrock of my world, were replaced by a hollow, chilling courtesy. The silence in our apartment transformed again. It was no longer tense or heavy, it was empty. It was the silence of a tomb. The small, intimate rituals that had been the scaffolding of our marriage disappeared one by one. He stopped making coffee for me in the morning. He no longer kissed the top of my head when he passed behind my chair. When I tried to kiss him goodnight, he would offer a cheek, his lips cool and brief against my skin. It was like living with a polite, considerate stranger who just happened to share my address. This silent retreat was infinitely more terrifying than the fiery explosion I had spent months trying to engineer. This wasn't a passionate fight for our marriage. It was its quiet, methodical dismantlement. This was its funeral. Panic, cold and raw and absolute, finally seized me. I saw the game for what it was. A fool's errand that had cost me everything. The arrogance, the anger, the stubborn pride, it all evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, terrified woman who had broken her most precious possession. I tried to reverse course, to undo the damage with a frantic, clumsy campaign of affection. I started leaving work on time every day, rushing home to cook his favorite meals. I planned surprises, buying him a rare first edition of a book he loved, booking a weekend trip to a rustic cabin where we had spent our first anniversary. I showered him with "I love yous," my words sounding hollow and desperate even to my own ears. But my efforts were met with a polite, impenetrable wall. He would thank me for the gifts with a small, sad smile. He would agree to the plans, but his heart wasn't in it. His eyes were distant, his laughter a hollow echo of what it once was. I was chasing a version of him that no longer existed, a man I had personally snuffed out. I was trying to hug a phantom, and my arms closed on empty air every time. One night, after another dinner eaten in near total silence, the quiet became a physical pressure, crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't take it anymore. I followed him into the living room as he was settling into his armchair with a book. Tears I could no longer contain streamed down my face. "Please, Julian," I begged, my voice breaking, shattering the suffocating stillness. "Just talk to me. Yell at me. Scream at me. Say something. Anything. This silence is killing me. What is wrong?" He slowly closed his book, marking his page with a practiced calm. He turned to face me, and for the first time in weeks, his expression was not vacant. It was filled with a weary, profound finality. He looked at me as if from a great distance, across an unbridgeable canyon. "I'm done, Alara," he said. The 3 words were spoken so quietly, yet they hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "Done?" I choked out, the word tasting like ash. "What do you mean, done? Because of the dinner?" "It was a mistake, I was stupid, I am so sorry." "It wasn't just the dinner," he interrupted, his voice still quiet but unyielding, cutting through my frantic denials. "The dinner was just the final piece of evidence. It was the moment I finally stopped making excuses for you and saw the truth. He asked you out. I asked you out. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, and you chose to lie to my face to be with him instead of me." He took a deep breath, the sound impossibly loud in the still room. "I finally understood. You don't want me to be more passionate. You just don't want me. You've spent months trying to chisel me into a man I'm not, a man I don't want to be. You've treated my trust not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. You haven't been fighting for our marriage, Alara. You've been testing it to destruction." His voice, for the first time, held a tremor of the deep hurt I had inflicted. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't live with someone who doesn't respect me enough to be honest. I'm tired of being your test. I'm just so tired." I pleaded. I sobbed. I made 1,000 promises I should have made months ago. I promised to change, to stop the games, to go to therapy, to do anything. I told him I loved him, that he was all I ever wanted, that I had been a fool. But my words were hollow, coming far too late. They were the desperate cries of a woman who had already burned her own house down and was now begging for a key to the ashes. He looked at me with an almost pitying sadness, the look you might give a lost and broken thing. "I don't think you know what you want, Alara," he said, his voice gentle again. "But I know it isn't me. Not the real me." The next day, I came home from work to find his closet half empty. His books were gone from the shelves, leaving neat, dusty rectangles in their place. His coffee mug was gone from the dish rack. On the kitchen counter, where we used to leave each other loving notes, was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a note with the name and phone number of a divorce lawyer. I had spent months trying to break through his wall of calm, expecting to find a fiery, passionate man hidden inside. I had been catastrophically wrong. All I had found on the other side was an empty space where his love for me used to be. My life unraveled with a breathtaking, brutal speed. The weeks that followed were a blur of shame and frantic, futile efforts. I left dozens of voicemails on Julian's phone, my voice cracking with a desperation that embarrassed me even as I spoke. I sent hundreds of texts, pleas, apologies, declarations of love that were met with a digital silence that felt like a judgment. The only replies came from his lawyer, polite, brief emails confirming the divorce was proceeding. There was nothing to discuss. The collapse was total, and it radiated outwards, poisoning every corner of my life. When I finally worked up the courage to call my parents, sobbing and confessing my catastrophic failure, I was hoping for comfort, for a soft place to land. Instead, my mother's voice was cool, laced with a weary disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "Alara, what did you expect?" she asked, her tone devoid of sympathy. "We all saw this coming. You can't keep poking a good, steady man with a stick and not expect him to eventually walk away. Love isn't a game." My friends, our friends, performed a slow, quiet fade. Invitations to group dinners dwindled. Replies to my texts became delayed, then stopped altogether. I ran into our mutual friend, Sarah, at the grocery store. The hug she gave me was stiff and brief, her eyes darting away, unable to meet mine. "I hope you're doing okay," she mumbled, before making a quick excuse and hurrying down the aisle. I was an island, isolated by the wreckage of my own making. The world I had built with Julian had been a warm, welcoming place. The world I had made for myself was cold, silent, and solitary. Work became an unbearable torture chamber. My performance plummeted. I stared at spreadsheets for hours, my mind a fog of regret. The final, humiliating straw came when Marcus, seeing my vulnerability as an opportunity, cornered me by the coffee machine. "Now that you're free," he began, his hand landing with a proprietary weight on my lower back, "maybe we can finally have that celebration properly." Something inside me snapped. The disgust was so potent, so absolute, it almost made me sick. This man, this cheap, shallow source of validation for whom I had traded my entire world, was now trying to collect his prize. I slapped his hand away, a sharp, cracking sound in the quiet office. With a clarity I hadn't felt in months, I walked straight to HR and filed a formal complaint. An investigation was launched. The office became a minefield of whispers and sideways glances, and I couldn't take it anymore. I quit, walking out with a cardboard box of my personal belongings and no plan for the future, only the desperate need to escape the scene of my crimes. The divorce was finalized in less than an hour in a sterile, impersonal courtroom that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. There was no drama, no fighting over assets. Julian was fair, detached, his jaw set. I sat there, numbly signing papers that dismantled my life, my chest a hollow ache. I looked at him one last time, searching his face for a flicker of regret, of sadness, of anything that mirrored my own agony. But his eyes were clear, his expression calm. He was already gone. He had moved on. To survive, I picked up a part-time job at a quiet, dusty bookstore. The irony was not lost on me. I spent my days surrounded by stories, a constant reminder of the one I had so spectacularly ruined. At night, fueled by caffeine and shame, I poured my remaining energy into a small online business I started from scratch, designing custom stationery. It was a fragile, fledgling thing, a tiny sprout of green in a scorched earth landscape, but it was mine. It was the only part of my life that didn't feel like a ruin. My living situation is a constant, painful reminder of my failure. Unable to afford the apartment on my own, I had to get a roommate. Her name is Chloe, a young, chaotic art student who leaves a trail of destruction in her wake. Dirty dishes grow mold in the sink, her wet towels mildew on the bathroom floor, and she treats the living room we once so lovingly decorated as her personal landfill. This home, once my sanctuary, our sanctuary, is now a chaotic, depressing space that smells of stale takeout and turpentine. Every clean corner, every remaining piece of furniture we picked out together, is a monument to what I carelessly destroyed. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the silence of the apartment is broken only by the hum of the city or my roommate's snoring, I finally understand with a clarity that feels like a physical blow. I had the truest, steadiest love a person could ask for. A love built on the bedrock of trust and quiet devotion. And I, in my foolish, arrogant, and insatiable hunger for drama, took a sledgehammer to it. I wanted to hear the noise of it breaking, convinced it would sound like passion. I was wrong. The silence that followed is the only thing I can hear now. It's the vast, empty silence of a life I could have had, a happiness I threw away, and a good man I didn't deserve. I created this silence, and now I have to live in it. It is the sound of my consequence.